Welcome to Purpose 360. I am so delighted today to have the number one thinker, acclaimed by Thinkers 50, along with his colleague, Paul Polman. But Andrew Winston is joining us today. He is an esteemed expert in sustainability. He's an author, and we're going to talk a little bit about his wonderful first book, Green to Gold, and then Net Positive. He's a speaker. He's an advisor. He is truly just an amazing driver of change. He's candid. He sees the future, but he's also very realistic. So I am thrilled to have you. It's going to be one of our earliest shows in 2026. So welcome to Purpose 360, Andrew.
Glad to be here. Always fun to talk to you, Carol. Thanks for having
me. You're so kind. So before we dive into really the deep conversation, can you talk a little bit about how you got into sustainability? And was there an epiphany? I love to hear these stories about, there was that one little turning point that, yeah, this is the direction I want to go in.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if there was a single epiphany, but there was kind of a moment or a few weeks where the kind of die was cast. So it came out of, frankly, being unemployed. So I was at a .com after being in the media business, for the first part of my career. And the .com crash happened. And like many, I was unemployed. Excuse me. Do you want me to start
Hey,
again?
Andrew, let's start again because you're freezing a couple times. And so my question, do you need a drink? Do you want some water to have?
Do
that. Okay, we'll just start again. No problem. I'll just play the piano. There you go.
Okay.
Yes, I always have. Okay. Okay,
I could
great.
Just start from the answer if you want.
Yeah, start. I don't know if we can do that in video, so I'm going to start from the beginning, if that's okay.
Yep.
Okay. Welcome to Purpose 360. It's the beginning of 2026, and I am honored to have one of the world's foremost thinkers and speakers on sustainability, also an advisor, a change maker, Andrew Winston, join us on the show. Welcome to Purpose 360, Andrew.
Thanks for having me. It's always fun talking to you.
And I want to just share with our listeners that there is this group, the Thinkers 50, which celebrates and elevates the foremost thinkers in the world. And Andrew used to be number 3, but he's now number 1 with his colleague, Paul Polman. How does it feel to be the number 1 thinker in the world, Andrew?
Yeah, it's very funny. I mean, it was a strange experience. And I sometimes think I'm not even the number 1 thinker in my family, but
okay.
It's, look, it's an interesting group. It's kind of a funny thing they do to kind of look at management thinkers. It was an honor, even if it's not that widely known. There is kind of a group of people in the world that are aware of this list and really respect it. And I'm one of them. And it kind of feels like something you got to live up to now. But for me, I think, and Paul has said this too, it's really been about our work, and that this organization has said, you can be the top thinker working on sustainability, like that. It's important enough to the world. And they felt like our book together was important, right? And was changing the conversation in business. I hope that's true, right? But I think it shows real support for all the work that we do, that you and I do and others do. And that was what was kind of so touching for me.
And I love that you said in your acceptance speech that regenerative has now become actually in practice. It was an idea previously, but I think through Net Positive, and I have to tell you, I probably have bought or shared hundreds of the book with my colleagues and friends and such, because it's a great book, and it shows there's a reality in that book that I think, and very authentic.
Thank you.
But congratulations on the fact that, you're saying that there's a fluency now and a passion towards regenerative, which is really important.
Well, and in a time where obviously, and we'll get into this, there's been an attack on sustainability and an incredible backlash. So given that, it was even, kind of more exciting for me, I think, or more important to our movement.
That's great. So let's just talk a little bit about your background, because you weren't born a sustainability expert. You didn't come out of college and say, "I'm going to try
Yeah.
and green up the world." So how did you get into it? And then was there an epiphany moment that was like, "I really want to do this"?
Yeah, I'm not sure there's ever like a single moment things build, but there was kind of a few week period that my life changed, and I thought I got to go do this. So my first part of my career was in consulting at BCG, and then I was in media companies, and I went to a .com, and then the .com crash happened, and I was unemployed, and it let me start anew, really. And I had just gotten married, and my wife was surviving the .com and the layoffs, and so she was still gainfully employed. And it let me step back, and
Mm,
I'd been doing normal business strategy, marketing, branding kind of jobs, and I knew I kind of had this need to do something more. And I had this feeling that the things weren't really right in the world. And I was, a vegetarian and doing things to kind of reduce my impact, but I didn't really have the language. And so I started asking around and read a couple kind of key books, like in this field, the ones that really inspired me, like from Ray Anderson and from Paul Hawken,
okay,
Ecology
yeah.
of Commerce. And over those few weeks, when I read those, it just kind of changed my life. I thought, oh, this is what I have to go do. I have to use my business background and point it in this direction. So ended up going back to grad school to get an environmental
Mm,
management degree because I already had an MBA, but wanted to get some of the science and some of the policy, and then started working with my co-author for my first book, Dan Esty, who is still a professor there, and that led to the first book and kind of kicked off my whole career in this space. And the book is going to be 20 this year, which is just absolutely
great. Wow.
shocking, just
And
shocking
that's
to me.
green. That's green to gold for our
Green to
listeners.
gold. Yeah,
I'm curious, is it still selling? Are there some key themes in the book that you
yeah.
said, boy, I really nailed it 20 years ago?
Yeah, look, you hope that a book, I mean, look, books are always dated the minute they print, right? But that's in kind of data, the numbers or specific examples. But you hope that the frameworks when you put out a
Hmm.
book are fairly timeless, right? That's what you shoot for. And I think, yeah, I think Green to Gold, it does still sell. It's used in business schools and things. And I still think it's kind of a good foundation. And I sometimes will get asked to basically come speak and do a Green to Gold talk because there could be
Mm,
a region, a country, an industry that are a little further behind or feel like they're just getting started on this. That's less and less true now, right? Which is kind of the larger point and why I think we're ready to talk about something more
mm.
aggressive, like being net positive. And we can come back to kind of what that looks like.
That's great. So when you started the work, how was sustainability described or
Mm.
defined when you started the work?
Yeah.
Because I think there's a transition. Because when we started doing social impact work in the 80s, I mean, people looked at us as kind of being weird too. So I'm curious about the initial description and then where it's going to.
Well, look, the classic definition comes out of the 80s from the UN Brundtland report, and when I got into this, that was, I think, really the foundational definition. And it, as you know, but maybe not everybody's memorized, it's the idea was that we have sustainable development or development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. That's always been a really great functional definition, but it is really clinical, right? And it
Mm,
is kind of, as my friend Hunter Lovin says, it's like the bare minimum. It's like just getting your nose
mm,
above water to say, okay, we're not going to take from the future. If we got to that, it would be pretty amazing. But we've kind of gone past the point where that's enough. And so I think sustainability has broadened quite a bit and has much more nuanced, much more evolved frameworks that tell us that we need to live inside the kind of bounds of the planet, what it can offer us and what it can take in terms of pollution, and try to create a world that's just and has enough or sufficiency for all. There's some bigger concepts now that I think are
mm,
embedded in sustainability. So it's for me, sustainability is when you see action and engagement on really our existential challenges, right? Climate and biodiversity, inequality, justice. That's what sustainability is pushing for. I think how it's defined in business often for people who haven't made a career in this, they think it they think it often means philanthropy, right? And I think we
Hmm.
spend a lot of time in our work. I've been saying this for years, having to say it out loud in talks, hey, it's not philanthropy. That's something different, also important, but something very different. This is about
Right.
how we operate in a
Mm.
way that keeps the world livable. So that was a long answer because there's no like 4 to 8 word thing in what sustainability is, right? It's a it's a pretty big concept about having an operating system for the world that helps us thrive.
Helps us, and we need to do that. I am curious. I always ask the question about, was there an influence from your parents that has really helped guide your intuition in this? I'm just curious about that.
Well, I think whether or not you mean to, as when you have kids, you realize you've screwed them up in a unique way, and
Right.
you are influenced by them no matter what. And I didn't grow up in a so-called tree hugging family. I kind of hate that phrase, but we didn't camp. My dad was allergic to grass. Like we had allergies.
Okay. Yeah.
We kind of had a normal, not that engaged life. But I was thinking about this question, about what my parents inspired. And I've been thinking about it a lot lately because I'm in the kind of elder care phase
Mm.
and my parents are up there and we moved them to a retirement community in the last year. So it's something I think about a lot. And I think my parents taught me to care about others and the world, but not really explicitly. It was just how they showed up,
How
right? It
they
was just
showed up. Right.
how they showed up for us.
Hmm.
And as families go, me, my two sisters, and my parents, we're pretty good shape. Like so many families are pretty screwed up, right? We don't hate each other. We're not fighting. Like we do pretty well
Mm.
still to this day. And when we're at family gatherings, we joke that our spouses end up in another room, and the original five of us end up in the kitchen
Oh,
talking because we still kind of like each other, right?
I still kind
Um,
of love each other, I think.
yeah,
Yeah.
but my dad, there was one example that I think really has stuck with me for a long time, which was I told you before we started recording that I grew up in Florida. And, my dad got a job up north. He worked for IBM and he was coming to headquarters. And that was the start of high school. And it was a really rough time to move when you're 13. And
Mm.
it took me a while to find my friends, to kind of be comfortable living in the north, like dealing with snow, like it was weird. And 2 years later, he got an offer to go back to Florida at IBM. And he said it, and I just kind of broke down because I'd finally adjusted. And so my dad commuted to Florida
Oh. Oh.
for the my junior and senior year. Once I went to college, it was more moot. But like that was kind of an amazing thing. He would go down for like Monday to Thursday and fly back to spend the weekends or try to be around for sports or my singing or whatever I was doing. And that is something that's always been in my head as I've been a father now for 22 years.
Mm.
Is thinking about that kind of sacrifice. Um, my sisters and I always joke that my dad is this. If you said, "Hey, I'm cold," and he's 3 hours away, he'd drive you up and give you a sweater. You know.
Oh.
So it's kind of what they did, right? Not in a way what they said. Um, so I think it's amazing how much influence that has, even if it's not always explicit.
I'm curious about, because the work that we all do is about caring, is about saying it's not just today, it is the future, and it's trying to understand that it's it seems that relationship with your parents really did have an impact on your career.
Yeah. And it does. I think look, I think you said it. I mean, I probably should have said when you asked what is sustainability that I think what separates it from just kind of normal business strategies is just kind of getting humanity back into business and caring,
Mm.
right? And
Right.
we talk about this in Net Positive, and we use the phrase love in a few places in the book. And some reviewer, someone said, I've rarely seen the word love in a business book.
Yeah.
It's just not something we normally talk about. And I think the squeezing of humanity out of all of our systems is part of what's gone wrong, right, in our country and in the world.
Let me bridge, because I think this is interesting vis-a-vis AI, but also purpose. And I've seen
Mm,
you talk about organizational purpose as something really important. But I'm curious, because today we're going to talk about sustainability. I do a lot of work in purpose, but what is the role of an organization's purpose as it
mm.
advances its sustainability strategy and commitments?
Well, I think it helps you prioritize. I mean, we could talk about this, you and I, and we've written books on something like this, so it's kind of hard to say quickly, but purpose has become a little bit of a catch-all. I mean, every company has one, even if it's unstated, right? Even if they haven't thought it through, there's a reason for them being. Some exist just literally to make money, right? But I think products and services generally have some reason for being. They also just want to make money, but they're solving some problem, right? At the simplest level. Um, you know, I think for me, the short version is the purpose is, what can give people excitement and engagement about the work they do. Like that's a core reason to have a purpose at work. But it also is on a tactical level, it just helps you prioritize. It helps you do the kind of materiality analysis or look at the sustainable development goals and say, where do we really play, right? Where
Right.
are we having a material impact on the world or vice versa? And where do we need to do better, right? Where can we help the world? That's where I think, and what are we maybe uniquely qualified to do? It's like the
Right.
ikigai, the Japanese idea. I think companies a little bit have that too. What are we capable of? What are we uniquely capable of? And what can we specifically do for the world? That's what I hope it provides.
And we'll get into humanity later. I want to talk about AI and balancing
Yeah.
a human and humane organization. So let's talk about your Fortune article.
Hmm.
You penned it. It was very provocative. It, had a headline: "The year sustainability was supposed to die and didn't." So
Yeah,
I'm
I think we
curious
ended up with
about
the year sustainability didn't die. I think that's where it
didn't
ended
die.
up.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right,
something
didn't
like
die. So
that.
we'll get that
Yeah.
correct. So, what did critics get wrong? And
Mhm.
where's the real impact taking place? Why is sustainability not dead?
Well, there's kind of two buckets of critics, right? There's kind of the obvious, the anti-sustainability crowd. I don't think they got it wrong necessarily, but they did, I think, so far overestimate their impact.
Hmm.
Even coming from the full force of the U.S. federal government, it hasn't stopped everything. I mean, when I say it didn't die, I mean there's been companies that have laid off sustainability people for sure. Greenhushing, or not saying a word about your sustainability work, has become the only thing companies do. It's like the norm.
Hmm.
Um, but the work continues, and most of the companies
Yep.
I talk to or work with, they're just quieter about it. And so what I think maybe everybody got a little wrong, but especially the critics, was they didn't really understand, and probably still don't, what's driving sustainability.
Mm.
You know, at least verbally, what they say is it's about being woke or some liberal plot or some progressive agenda. Then, if that's what you believe, you think attacking it is righteous and maybe good for business. You're helping them get away from this thing that costs more money. But that's not at the core what's driven sustainability. What's driven it is like the realities on the ground, meaning we do climate work, not just because Greenpeace wants us to, but because there's climate change and it's
Hmm.
affecting the world, and we care. We do diversity because the world's getting more diverse, right? So it's driven by real things, and those real things have only accelerated, which is why I think it kind of can't die. Companies have to engage on most of these things. And we got it, our collective group in this field, we got it on the corporate agenda. But in a way, just the
Hmm.
problems of the world put it on the agenda. Um, I think there's a critics group from the other side, which is kind of within the sustainability community, the kind of nihilists who just have almost given up and think companies are all full of it. It's all greenwashing. And I think what they got wrong is, whether companies were committed or not. I
Hmm.
think they figured they'll just all pull back when given the chance. And again, I'm not sure you need to be some huge believer to continue doing most of this work. You just have to believe it affects the business. And I
Right.
think that has come to pass, right? So you just see the inside people crying greenwashing, and it's just not that simple, right?
No.
Nothing.
So what are the characteristics? I'm curious of a CEO, because you do a lot of advisory,
Yeah.
that are shifting from, oh, it's a nice thing to do, it's the right thing to do, to truly seeing the business upside. What are the characteristics of those CEOs, and will we see more of them? Because there's a changeover to the next younger generation,
Yeah.
and so they'll embrace it because it's good business.
Yeah. I wish I could say we've seen some huge uptick of CEOs getting it, but I mean, again, they're all so quiet right now, and it's not a time of real courage in the US in
Hmm.
particular. Again, I think they just are practical and know it is
Hmm.
on the agenda. Um, So I think they have to be kind of open-minded enough to see that it isn't just some anti-business attack. But you mentioned it in passing. I think most companies and businesses change and the norms change
Hmm.
because younger generations take over, at all
Right.
levels, right? The employees coming in are a new generation, and the CEOs move generations also, right? Right now, it's basically my generation, Gen X CEOs, right? The boomers are retired. We're going to start to see millennial CEOs. And for the most part, on any big change, even at the company level for an innovation agenda, it generally happens more when there's been a change of leadership, right?
Hmm.
Just because
Right.
someone retires or they merge with someone. It's really rare to see kind of a really big change in thinking within the same tenure.
Mm.
I think that's what makes the Walmart story from 20 years ago so compelling. Was the CEO then, Lee Scott,
Yeah.
kind of had this awakening about sustainability. It doesn't happen that often. So
Right.
I don't know if there's a lot of CEOs that get it. It's hard to say right now because they're being so quiet. But,
Hmm.
you know, as I said, on at least some parts of the agenda, some of the big parts like decarbonizing the world, things are still moving.
Yeah.
And, I think they get that it's part of business because it's increasingly cheaper. It's a better technology, all of it. And they still hear it from stakeholders, their business
Mhm.
customers, employees, some investors. You know, I don't think I think CEOs don't have as much. They have more latitude than maybe they realize, and they kind of feel like they always have to do the profit maximizing thing. And now the key stakeholders, they are asking questions about these things.
Mm. So, where is sustainability flourishing, especially globally? I know that you are very bullish on green markets and green technology. So,
Yeah,
where, and we're going to probably say China because China is like just galloping
yeah,
forward in terms of what it's doing. And then is there like a company or two that you go, boy, these really, US or not, they really
yeah.
get it?
So, I mean, flourishing is probably a big word for sustainability right now. If my summary was it didn't die, that's a kind of much lower bar than flourishing.
Okay. Lower bar.
But that said, I mean, you've seen some of the data that's come out in the last 4 or 5 months that shows, survey-wise at least,
Hmm.
99% of global CEOs in an Accenture survey said they weren't changing really on their sustainability, and 88% said the business case was better than it was 5 years ago. So that kind of answers the previous question. Like they see it as kind of a normal part of business.
Business, right.
But I mean, flourishing again, I think you mentioned that the clean economy is, of course, flourishing, and it's growing so much faster than people realize in the US because there's a concerted effort to fight renewable energy and EVs, and the government's against it. And there's a concerted effort to kind of give people misinformation. I don't think Americans realize how fast this is happening around the world. And there's
Mm.
lots of amazing stats, but basically in 2025, coal and natural gas use were flat, really for the first time. And all of the new electricity was provided by solar, wind, storage, and some nuclear. That's that's a tipping point, right? And the EV, growth is remarkable. It's 20% of new cars globally. It's 50% of Chinese new
Mhm.
cars. So that pace of change is remarkable, and you know, it's becoming a multi-trillion dollar market. So that's a win. I think the other surprising place I'm seeing it is kind of what would seem like unlikely sectors like mining. They
Mm.
have a big role to play in this clean economy. So I've just done a lot of speaking over the last couple of years at mining in South America, where they're engaged on these issues. They know that some of what they do, digging up coal, some fossil fuels like that's probably going away or it's been in decline, but they know there's all this new opportunity. And then there's also like oddly kind of heavy industry, steel and
Mm.
aluminum. They're moving forward on decarbonizing and electrifying production. And that seems to be moving. So it's kind of a surprising thing. The normal leaders like Unilever under Paul, they've gone pretty quiet. No one wants to lead at the retail consumer product kind of forward facing level. It seems like, and I've heard this even from the kind of recruiting and staffing perspective, that deeper in the supply chain in
Mhm.
heavier industry, sustainability is kind of growing and staffing up because it's kind of where the rubber meets the road, right? It's
Right.
like it's where it has to really happen. And that it does seem to be moving along, and that's really good news.
And is it happening in the US as well as global markets?
Yeah, I
or
think
less so?
I think, like I said, I haven't seen in many clients a real pullback. Um, no one wants to lead. Everyone's being quiet. That does cause problems. But again, at the kind of operational level,
Hmm.
the decarbonizing is happening. The U.S., the data on, where is new energy coming from is the same in the U.S. It's almost entirely renewables. I mean, again, there's a concerted effort by the government, so coal use actually went up last year, but that's all part of companies buying renewables too. It isn't just utilities; it's companies buying their own and building efficiency into their business, doing the things that kind of move you down a path of lower carbon, more sustainable business. That stuff is continuing.
Yeah.
Again, it's very quiet.
But let me ask you a question. I'm going to jump to
Yeah,
AI because I thought it was fascinating that Microsoft is going to regenerate what 3 Mile Island to get nuclear power to
yeah,
help with its data centers. What do you
yeah.
think of that?
The demand for energy from AI is huge, right? It absolutely is. I think it's much more complicated than people kind of let on. The macro data is clear, right? Google, Microsoft, they had these aggressive goals. They were heading down towards net zero. They were buying renewables in huge quantities. And then over 4 or 5 years, like I think Google's emissions went up 50%. So they just
Mm,
blew through their goals. So that is factual. So it's fair to worry about that. But AI also replaces some other energy use. If it does something faster, it helps you do something that you would have done for an hour on your computer. That took energy too, right? So there's this trade-off happening. But the tech companies have been pretty committed to decarbonizing for many reasons. I think they also find it a risk reduction, right? Not to be reliant on fossil fuels that have huge price swings, right? They want to be reliant on renewable energy that has a variable cost of basically zero, right? That's
mm,
that's the ideal. And I think the demand is so high, they're looking anywhere they can. So I'm not surprised to see that they want to go to nuclear. I don't know if that's going to happen. It takes a lot to
mm.
start or build a nuclear plant, but it does tell you something about how much demand they believe there
Right.
really is.
Right. I mean, I'm a big fan of Satya, and the fact that they were in terms of their emissions, they were even going backwards to try and
Yeah.
remediate those. So, I mean, I think that they're constantly trying to innovate and look forward. So,
Well, and they've been a few companies, Microsoft, Stripe, a few others have actually invested in carbon sequestration at really expensive prices. It's the side of things where sustainability is more expensive. It's new technologies. It's not at
yeah,
scale yet. And
yeah,
you need early adopters. And a few of these companies have actually put money up to try to help to experiment, try new
yeah.
technologies. And I think that the small nuclear idea is another one. And they're putting their money where their mouth is. So
That's a
I
bright
think kind of
spot.
impressive.
Yeah, and he takes a leader who's got courage, and we're going to get
Yeah.
into courage in a moment. So you've talked about positive things and that there is movements because it's good for business in climate tech and green
Yeah.
markets and such. Unfortunately, the Trump administration recently announced that they were withdrawing from what over 60 different
Yeah.
UN related organizations. And I just, that was like, I'm sure when you heard that, that was probably like a knife in your heart. How are you feeling about
Yeah.
that?
Look, I mean, that's the least of our problems. I mean, you could argue that if you're going to be a non-believer in some kind of group action in general and the issues like climate change, and non-believer is an understatement, then it's better that they're not at these meetings, right? I think it was better they weren't at the COP meeting because they were just going to slow it down. I mean, yes, ideally, you want 100% of the global economy involved in these big discussions, and you don't want the 15% or whatever that's the US to be sitting on the sidelines, but we are,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
So I, I'm not saying it's a good thing this has happened, but given the position of this administration, it's probably a good thing, right? I mean, look what they did with USAID. When they do have any
Oh,
real input, they try to destroy it.
yeah.
So it's just a signal of this, super nationalism, and we can go it alone. And that just doesn't work. It's never worked
Right.
in human history, in biology, like going it alone
Right.
doesn't actually work. So I think the world's going to have to go around us, and they already are doing that,
They are.
right?
They are.
The EU
I'm
is realizing that they don't have a partner in NATO anymore. They're building their own defense. They're not going to have a partner in tackling climate change and kind of these shared issues. And Canada's kind of said, okay, we're kind of done with you for now, and that's the reality. So look, it's not great, but they already pulled out of the Paris Agreement.
right.
Um, they like I wouldn't be surprised. The only reason we won't pull out of the UN is we have the Security Council, right? We
Yeah.
have the one vote of the five. I think if we didn't have that, they'd probably get out of the UN, even though it's
Yeah.
on our
They
property.
close it down. I'm curious what coalitions have come together outside the UN that are, they're recognizing, to your point, and a key point net positive is you've got to collaborate. You've got to
Mhm.
go with others to really help with these big issues. Any key coalitions you'd like to shout out that you're saying, like, hey, listeners, you might want to, become part of this or at least
Mhm.
follow their thought leadership?
It's a good question. I mean, there's some long-standing partnerships that some of them are just industry, groups like Consumer Goods Forum that have gone through phases of doing really good work on big issues. Again, they're pretty quiet right now. Um, like I mentioned before, there's kind of surprising work in the really heavy industries, and there's this group working with the World Economic Forum that's the First Movers Coalition. It's been around for a little while. That one I really like. It's got producers of heavy
Hmm.
materials and then buyers saying, "Hey, we will buy the cleaner options if you make it." Those kinds of It's a little bit like solar and PPAs where you agree to buy the power, and that
Hmm.
helps the business get going. It's really hard to find these partnerships right now.
Okay.
Again, if you're this is the downside of being really quiet is it's pretty hard to collaborate if you're
Mm.
not out there talking. But there's a lot going on around plastics. There's some really interesting stuff, experiments on reusable containers. There's a big organization setting the standards for reusable containers, and they've been doing experiments in Seattle for a while with a bunch of hospitals, stadiums, universities, where they all agree to use the same basic, cups that go to a central place and get cleaned and go back. So those are fun, kind of interesting partnerships of a bunch of different institutions.
Yeah.
And there's a few of those pockets, right, of experiments going on, and that's what we're going to have to see probably.
Right.
And, I think much more local, right?
Hmm.
Local
Very low.
sustainability
Yes.
stuff. We're not going to get help from the national level. So it's got
Yeah.
to kind of be bottom up.
Right. You have been very blunt about saying that sustainability is held to a higher ROI than other business decisions, especially. I love to hear you talking about AI. AI, we're going to put in billions and trillions, and what's the ROI?
Yeah.
I am very curious about your, why do you have this point of view, and when will sustainability? I mean, it's proven in so many areas
Yeah.
now with tons of data.
It's a really hard look. I've been working on this for 20 plus years, and it's
You didn't have
frustrating.
gray hair then, right?
Yeah, no, I started really young, but this probably accelerated it. And so, look, it's obvious that sustainability is held to a higher standard. They're asked to prove with some specific ROI
Right.
almost everything they do, and and that's fine to have business logic, but I don't know who we're kidding. Like even like marketing or R&D are made up. They're guesstimates, right, on the return, right? I mean, when you say we're launching a new product or we're
Right.
putting a Super Bowl ad out, you're guessing, right, as a marketing executive, like how much is this going to pay
Right.
back? But the example I've been using for a couple of years is that obviously people are pouring money into AI without pausing to say what's the
Mhm.
exact ROI. And now
Right.
there's surveys that have come out, IBM and others, showing the percentage of companies saying they know even if it paid back or feel like it paid back is low, like
Right.
25%. And so imagine if sustainability initiatives were like 75% failure or unknown,
Right.
we would be laughed out of the building. So it's just that sustainability always starts kind of way behind the starting line. Like if the gun goes off, we're like 100 yards back because it plays into this narrative, the kind of neoliberal narrative that the purpose of business is just maximizing shareholder profits. And sustainability is inherently stakeholder based. It's inherently
Mm.
about kind of our connection and our shared resources. And when the whole system is geared towards maximizing one dimension of business success, it just our stuff always feels like it's pulling CEOs away from, or CFOs away from, the real work, right?
Mm.
I also think ROI is kind of complicated and kind of broken because it's never measured in tangible,
Right.
value very well. And I'm not talking like externalized value, like internal, the stuff that's affecting the business, employee or customer retention or engagement, resilience, like these things that you can
That are,
put some numbers on, but they're hard.
mhm.
And often sustainability has a high quotient of longer term,
Yes.
systemic, intangible value. And that's
Right.
hard to measure.
So I assume in some of your advisory work, you've been called into companies regarding ROI metrics.
Yeah, I mean,
How do you approach that?
I've worked with companies for years on goals, which
Mhm.
is, pretty integrally tied to metrics, KPIs, right? It's like, what goals have they put out there? And I'm still doing that this year. Companies were getting to the end of their 2025 goals and putting out their 2030 or trying to put them together. And I worked with a few big brands. And it's interesting because everyone's evolved so much. They kind of know what the key KPIs are. And again, they're mostly keeping them, but the goals they want to talk about publicly, that's where
Mhm.
things are getting kind of pulled back. Again, it's this green hushing thing. Um, I'm always pushing the sustainability folks to do what I've been talking about, which is to kind of embed the conversation with a fuller sense of value creation. Like when you go in and
Mm.
say, this is the goal we have, it isn't
Right.
just because it looks nice to source responsibly. It has a
Mhm.
huge, set of value creation items like resilience in your supply chain, understanding your supply chain better,
Right.
identifying problems before they happen. So it's because it is really hard to convince people, why should you care about human rights, or slavery in your supply chain. it, there's going to be problems if you don't, right?
Mhm.
And it's a challenge, but I think increasingly, I hope that the CSOs are learning to make a broader ROI case. That's kind of what I'm always pushing for, is not just talk kind of tactical direct cash back, but think much
Right.
more broadly about the value to the business.
And reputation. I'm curious because in AI and now with GEO that you can list on your website and that will be scrubbed by, AI to show impact, but not, shout from the hills
Right.
greenwashing. Do you have any point of view about is that going to be at least a help to show what a company's record can be if indeed they're giving realistic, authentic reporting?
Well, they have to. The big guys have to report, right? There's
Right.
been challenges in Europe, and they restricted the number or the size of companies that would have to do reporting, but the big guys still have to do it. So
Hmm.
that data is going to exist somewhere. And you're right, AI should be able to go find it, even if they're not going to go say it. I think what
Hmm. Right.
what companies are doing less of, and I'm seeing this directly, is forward-looking statements like, we will be
Mhm.
net zero by
Yeah.
2035. They're really wary of that now, right? Of getting attention, getting criticism, even getting sued. They think kind of on the other side for greenwashing. I don't think that's as huge an issue as they might, but it is part of the thinking now that we shouldn't talk about forward-looking stuff,
Mm.
but their actual performance, their own assessment of climate risk, those things are now part of these reporting requirements. So they will be out there, right? They have to
Right.
put them out in some way.
Yeah. I am curious about you talk, you've had a beautiful talk, a TEDx talk about courage.
Mm.
And this is a time for courage. And so, why is courage critical to advance sustainability? And what does it look like? I bet you're going into companies and maybe some of your consulting with, with C-level teams. What does it look like?
It's a really good question. And it's, again, there's very little courage coming out of corporate leaders right now in the US. I think they're scared, right? I mean, there's actual personal threats against CEOs. And look, one was killed, right, early
Mhm.
last
Yeah.
year. There's threats if you come out in favor of some issue. They've just kind of all gone kind of into this quiet zone. And they feel, personally threatened, and I think they feel threatened in their jobs as well, that the attacks or boycotts will hurt the business and will hurt
Yeah.
their stock price. And that they will do poorly as a CEO. I I think the conversation now, in a way, with leaders has got to be broader about legacy, and kind of like the
Hmm.
deathbed conversation, like looking
Yep.
back. And I feel like some of these CEOs are going to look back at giving the president some bauble of gold, or going to tell him how great he is, that they're going to look back and think, what was I
What
doing?
was I
Like,
doing?
what was that about?
Right.
Right. So it takes courage, obviously, to literally stand up to pressure. I think we've seen it from some leaders in the academic community that have
Hmm.
just said, no, we can't sign this letter. We can't do these things you're asking, because it takes away our being, our reason for
Right.
being. It's also always been, I think, challenging for leaders to um, challenge the dominant narrative, to go against that. I'm supposed to maximize profits this quarter to the ultimate, and to ask this kind of deeper question that we do in Net Positive, which is the world better off because your business is in it?
Yeah,
That
right.
takes courage, because it's a different kind of question. I think the answer, and what I try to get companies to do, is to find ways to work together, because collective courage is
Yes.
the only real solution against systemic problems. And it's the only
Hmm.
path, I think,
Yep.
for individuals to find their best version of themselves, and courage is to find others, right, and not go
Yes.
it alone. That's our solution.
And I love that solution. And it's not one deer in the herd. It's the whole deer being together, and they're fighting the mountain lions. And
Yeah,
so it's a good image. You talked about humanity,
yeah.
and we've got AI, and that's very technological, and you've got all the challenges we have, especially in this country. What's the role for humanity in business these days? And are you being it's probably linked to courage, but
Yeah.
you can focus internally on your people and show your humanity. Is that showing up?
Well, less so than it was, because, I mean, look, for all the criticisms you can wage on DEI, diversity and inclusion is seeing people's humanity, seeing their
Hmm.
differences, right, recognizing them, inviting them in, including them, seeing the disabled community that's underemployed, right, seeing the different life paths that have gotten people where they are, or seeing systemic racism in companies. For a while, after the murder of George Floyd, we're diving into this, right? Holding town halls and talking about systemic racism, and changing their metrics. And I mean, there's a reason that this anti-sustainability group has gone after DEI so aggressively. I mean, they don't want true equality. They don't want, and look, we could debate whether certain diversity programs are the best path, but they're
Mm.
debating whether there's even racism, right? They're
Right.
trying to undercut the basic reality of differing opportunities, right, and differing outcomes. And let's just be blunt: there's a huge white supremacist streak
Mm.
in our government leadership, and so there's just racism in a lot of this. And they did effectively really squeeze DEI out of business, at least the
They did.
acronym, right?
Yep.
It's
For
it's
sure.
dead as an acronym. So I think that's part of the humanity agenda. But at a broader level, besides that, you know, very thorny set of issues, I think we've just forgotten that, again, the purpose of a business is to, as Peter Drucker said, find a customer or solve a customer problem. It's like, it's for a person in the end, right? It's
Yes.
for
Right.
somebody that needs something, and you're fulfilling that. And I once did a little workshop with a company. They made building materials, and like basically helped buildings be built. And I said, okay, let's just say, like, what's the purpose of the business? And I thought we'd go around and they'd be like, we put roofs over people's heads, right? We make them comfortable. It was like to make money. And this was years ago. And I was like,
Really.
wow. Yeah.
Well.
And then at the end of the kind of few hours together, one of the guys said, so we're going to do this sustainability stuff because it's good for the business, or because we'll sleep better at night? I said, well, I believe it's good for the business, but would it be so bad to sleep better? Like, is that such a
Great
horrible
comment.
outcome?
Great
Is that
comment.
like, why isn't that a good outcome? So I think, just on a really fundamental level, we've just forgotten that businesses in the end are for people, run by
Hmm.
people,
Right.
right? And yes, the AI thing is going to be an incredible challenge to that. I think it's going to
Hmm.
destroy many, many jobs, and you're going to see chunks of companies run by AI
Yeah.
that are not human. So we're kind of entering a new phase of humanity right now that I think we are
Entering
totally
a new
unprepared
phase of
for.
humanity. Yeah, it's interesting that near your podcast is that we had Alan Murray on, who's now head of the Wall Street Journal
Mm.
Leadership Institute, and it's a lot of peer to peer. He's got like 800 different C levels coming in groups, and he basically says, "Yeah, I talk to CEOs about AI, but they absolutely swiftly turn to people and to
Yeah.
culture." And he believes it's interesting. I said, "Well, what do you call this thing like stakeholder capitalism?" And he calls it human-centered organizations,
Mm.
which is good. So you've got
It's
another
great.
at least person in the fight with,
I hope.
years of experience, talking to C leaders in a more quiet way, peer
Yeah.
to peer. So that may be an approach. I'm curious about when I saw you at Climate Week that I was surprised that health and sustainability were being spoken about for the first time that I had heard. And I'm curious, are you hearing at all about that from some of your consulting or some of your clients, how the two are becoming linked together and recognized that, climate impacts, human health impact?
Probably not as much as it should. I think the data has been growing for years that there'll be diseases that go further north as the temperature changes, right?
Mm,
And that there's
right.
actual heat risk, severe heat risk. And so you hear, I think, the kind of more aware um, hospital systems and healthcare companies with this on their agenda, saying it isn't, sustainability isn't just access to drugs; it's the
Right.
general well-being and health.
Hmm.
And you're seeing, I think more discussions about, again, how the weather changes. There's interesting, I think, more and more attention now on heat. There's a little kind of coalition. You were talking about partnerships before, started in part by Forum for the Future, who I work with, and with Train Technologies that
Mm,
I also
yeah.
work with. And, they build huge cooling systems. And they just started a kind of dialogue with companies and trying to invite people in to talk about heat because cities are becoming less livable. They
Right.
need rules for outdoor workers because it can actually be incredibly dangerous. So I think that aspect of health is getting more and more attention and is less contentious than things like vaccines, right, where people like to argue.
Right.
Um, so I think, yeah, the climate impacts on us um, through this kind of deep change in the weather is just has to get more attention, right?
Hmm.
It's increasingly part of operating,
Yeah.
especially if you got outdoor workers.
Yeah. Great. I'm just curious when you are doing your advisory work or your speeches, there are many different areas that companies can have an impact that is aligned with their business. How should a leader decide that I should invest in one area, especially which might be inequality, social justice, in addition to the environment? How do they, if you're giving consulting, and I know you do,
Mm.
what do you say? How do you pick the place to play in, to have an
Well,
impact in?
yeah, I mean, it partly goes back to purpose and what is the business uniquely qualified to do, and where is it best positioned to help. But it's also about responsibility and not kind of in the old fashioned, kind of guilt trip citizenship thing, but the way we talk about it in net positive is you have a responsibility for your impacts up and down the value chain for how your business affects the world and the people in it. And that's just kind of common sense. It's the
Mm,
old adage, if you break it, you own it. Like
right,
you walk
exactly.
into a store and you break something, and you know, our operations as businesses, they crack things, they break things, and it's like we've walked away from it for so long. But I think increasingly, if you take a bigger view of responsibility, it gets you to the things that are most important that you can have the biggest impact on,
Okay.
or where you have the most impact on people, right? So the supply chains of apparel or food, in particular categories, have serious issues, right, with the quality of life, for indentured servitude, for kids working. These are clear issues of human rights. And look, these are not areas that companies have been very good at.
Mm,
There's a handful of leaders that have been working on these issues a very long time, but most companies try to ignore it. I just think that's harder and harder in a more transparent world, right? It's
yeah.
like you can find out almost anything now, um, and everybody's got a cell phone, everybody's got a camera, so it's just
Yep.
it's harder to hide.
It is harder to hide. As we wind down, and I could do 2 or 3 hours, and I hope we can get you to come back. But you said in their Fortune article, you said predicting the future, even predicting 2026, is laughably hard. So we get that. But what is truly at risk for companies and leaders 2026, 2027?
I mean, it sounds, I've been the guy talking about the business case for years, but honestly, like their souls, right? Like as a business and as
Yep.
humans, I mean,
Yep.
we are in a time, the theoretical, what would I have done if I were living in a fascist state? What would I have done in certain times in history? Well, you can find out right now, right? The attacks on rights. We just witnessed the killing of an unarmed citizen,
Mother.
right?
Yep.
Just driving. I mean, just the situation is very different, very dangerous, and I think companies and their leaders are at risk of um, really losing their moral center and their ethics. Right? That's the kind of human side.
Yep.
But there's always this larger business case, and if you are backing down, going quiet, thinking sustainability stuff is going away, I kind of go back to the point that the drivers are still there and accelerating, and the
Hmm.
solution set, like the clean economy, is moving quickly. I mean, the CEO of Ford recently said, like, we can't give up the EV race to China. Like, we can't succeed
Right.
as a business. So that's a very kind of specific example of we won't thrive as a business over time if we don't head in this direction with the rest of the world. So, and what's at stake is missing out, not being relevant, becoming a dinosaur, right? And that can happen really quickly now. Things are moving very, very fast. I posted recently about Blockbuster and Netflix. It's
Oh,
a
you saw
classic
that. Yep.
story, but it went fast, even for you know a technology that was taking a while to come. Streaming, you know, Blockbuster was peaking in 2004, just 9,000 stores. 6 years later, it was bankrupt,
Mm.
right? And 4 years later, the stores were all gone. So it it can happen fast, in certain categories. I think the energy system is the largest system we've ever built, so it will take some time. But we're in the exponential curve side now of the cost of new technologies, of adopting them, and so I think we're going to see change happen really fast. So it is really hard to predict, especially when you throw in, political leadership and uncertainty and war. That just creates, um, a powder keg and is really difficult to know. I mean, there are people predicting with utter confidence that there will be no elections in 2026 and that the martial law or something, and that
Mm.
they'll be fine and the Democrats will win, and like everyone equally confident, right, in their direct. And I think we really don't know, and that's much harder. We are in a time of not knowing. That's
Right.
probably always been true in life, but it's really hard now. And it's people would rather know, even if they're wrong, than not know, right? The uncertainty is what throws us all off. But we have to find a place of comfort. It's like a Buddhist thing, just
Mm.
that we're winning and losing. We're seeing progress and retrenchment. So how do you live with that? How do you live with that kind of that it's not black or white, it's black and white, right?
Right.
How do you find that space where you can get comfortable with it?
Brilliantly said. If you had to distill one parting comment to the C-suite, we
Hmm.
have a lot of our listeners. They're C-suite professionals, or they're mid-range, or they're aspiring sustainability careerists. Is there one non-negotiable, and is it about don't lose your soul? You talk a
Yeah.
lot about humanity.
It's find courage, and I think understand where the world's headed. Right? We're headed to a decarbonized world. We're heading
Hmm.
to a more diverse world. These are unstoppable kind of demographic trends, mega giga trends, value shifts. So are you going to be part of the future or not? Like take a really hard look at where the
Hmm.
world's going. And I guess I always hope that leaders will take a longer term view, right? Not just the quarter, not just this year, but what are you leaving the CEO of 5 or 10 years from now? Like, what are you
It,
leaving for them?
What's the legacy? You started
Right.
out by saying what's the legacy that you're leaving, not just on a quarterly basis.
Right.
I'm just curious. I know that Paul said very in the early days at Unilever, he said, if you don't like my stock, don't buy it. And
Yeah.
that he wasn't going to report on quarterly basis. Have companies at all joined that mantra?
No,
No.
I mean, he did that in like 2010. And
Yeah.
at the time, I thought, oh, this is great. We're finally going to see this sea change. Almost nobody followed. I mean,
Wow.
I find it kind of amazing. You know, there was another CEO at the time who said, like, hey, nobody really wants to run their company the way a 28-year-old analyst wants them to. But he wouldn't put it on record. He wouldn't say it publicly. And I don't know. I think there's a line kind of in Net Positive. There's an interview I did with Kumi Naidu, who ran Greenpeace and ran big organizations. And we quote him, and he says something to the effect of, "The CEOs are caught in this system too." And I think that's again the most humane and compassionate and empathetic view is there's not that many that want to destroy everything. I think Paul says that all the time. There are some, right? But
Mhm.
for the most part, CEOs are people. They got families. They want to do generally the right thing. Um, I think they don't fully understand where some of these gigatrends are going, or don't want to think about their role in making them worse or better.
Mm.
But they're human, right? They are human, and I think, as Kumi said, they're caught in this trap of the quarterly pressure, the stock. They got all the options, and they know they're surrounded by thousands of employees with some stock, that they have to keep that stock price going up. They're trapped in
Mm.
this system too. And again, it's pretty hard to be the one person, pulling out. You have to find a collection of people. It has to be
Right.
collective, right?
Right.
If a bunch of companies had all said, "Hey, we're not going to do this quarterly earnings thing," it would have worked a lot better, and there could
Mm.
have been a sea change. I thought more people would follow, but they didn't.
Mm. Well, sometimes maybe you're way, way far ahead. In closing, I always like to give the last word to my guest. We've had a wonderful conversation, hit so many topics. I do believe that there is some optimism in terms of where green markets are going and such, but there are very, very heavy headwinds. What's your last parting comment, Andrew, for our
You know,
listeners?
I think, assuming a lot of the listeners are in sustainability, and I guess partly just thank you for the work you're doing, and just an acknowledgement that it's been hard. And this is the hardest time I've seen in 20 to 25 years in this space. But I think it's always good to remember that we're right. That sounds really arrogant or something, but we're on the right side of history, and we're doing what's right for the business,
Mm.
what's right for the world. Like, the world just can't thrive. The business world can't thrive unless people and planet are thriving. That's always
Right.
kind of my last thought. We're doing this so that people and planet can thrive. And just know that
Yeah.
this is really good work.
It is really great work. It can be very innovative. It can be stimulating. It can be challenging. But this is our one planet, and this is our home, and
Yeah.
so we need it to thrive. I want to thank you, Andrew Winston. I hope I can get you back,
Yeah.
in a while. You are so wise. One other question: you do so many things. You write
Do I?
columns. You advise. You give speeches. What's your favorite thing to do in the field of sustainability? Is
I
there
mean, look,
one thing?
yeah, I mean, look, there's a really great feeling of like nailing a piece of writing, but
Mm.
I've almost never heard a writer interviewed from any generation who loves writing, right? It's
It's
really
painful.
it's
It's
painful.
painful.
There was a great interview I heard recently with like Jerry Seinfeld, and he's fundamentally a writer. Sits down with a yellow notepad, writes jokes, and just says it's hard. It's really really hard. But look, it sounds silly, but I've always been a performer. I grew up singing. I sang in college and after college, and so I like being on stage. I
Um,
love giving talks. I don't, when people list the things they'd hate the most or fear the most, like public speaking for a good
Speaking, and you
chunk of
like to do
people,
it.
I
Yeah.
like it. I very rarely get nervous in that way. I like having a little nerves when there's a big audience or something a little new or different. But I love being on stage. I love speaking.
Well, you're an evangelist, but one that is grounded in thought and in data and in relationships. And so we are very fortunate to have you on not just Purpose 360, but in terms of being one of the leaders of the movement, but someone that has humility, as well as knowing that there's a lot of people that you want to influence, and this is hard work. And we are very, very honored and thoughtful, and that we have Andrew Winston helping to battle this tough battle. So thank you so much for coming on to Purpose 360. Keep up the great work. And if I
You
could give
too.
you a hug, I'd give you a hug. But we're all in this together. So there is a long term.
Yeah.
It's not just quarterly. So we look forward
Yeah.
to hearing you, seeing you, and all your great influence. Thank you.
Thank you.